for the calendar which we follow is the solar calendar, the Gregorian calendar. And so we have 365 days or so in the year, following the solar calendar. Likewise, there are faiths and peoples who use the moon as a means for reckoning time. And so, particularly for the Muslims, they fast the month of Ramadan. It begins at the sighting of the moon and ends at the sighting of the new moon. So, the moon and the sun are a means of reckoning time. So, what is the spiritual fountain and dimension of this particular verse? He has made the sun the night of servitude or rest, and the sun of gnosis, meaning spiritual knowledge, knowledge of the divine and God, and the moon of faith, a means of reckoning time. So a person who has knowledge of God, and a person who has faith in God, then such a person will be an individual who is able to reckon and measure time. And contemplation will revolve around the rays of the sun, just like the planets revolve around the sun. As the planets revolve around the sun in our solar system, likewise the planet of contemplation, of thought, and how in need are we as a human race of contemplation and pondering, of thought, when things are getting so much quicker. No longer are we having, as we had a few years ago, if you look maybe 10 or 15 years ago, everyone's internet was dial-up. If a person had 56K internet dial-up modem, that was fast. And then it started to get quicker and quicker and quicker, until you got cable, and then you got ADSL and ADSL2 and plus and satellite and wireless, such that you no longer need to be connected physically in order to receive some benefit from the internet. But rather, if you like, it's a spiritual connection, where there's no cables that are connecting you to the source. And so likewise with the slave of God, he doesn't need a physical cable to connect him. But rather, if his heart is directed and aligned to the divine, then he will receive the download. But he has to upload something. And so sometimes when you go to some websites, in order to download, they say, look, there's an upload-download ratio. If you want to download some movies or some books or some programs, you also need to upload. We're not going to give you anything for free. There's also an upload-download ratio between the servant and his Lord. You upload by means of devotion and spiritual worship. And the download is going to be different to the ratio with the ADSL, because usually with ADSL, your upload speed, you have a low upload speed, and you have a big download speed. In fact, it's the same. You have a higher download speed than the upload speed, usually. So likewise, you perform a little work for God, then God will give you a great download. And it's a download that's not limited by gigs, not like 20 gig or 30 gig, but rather it's unlimited, because there are many actions which God mentions in the Quran. He mentions a particular reward, whether it be paradise with rivers flowing underneath its meadows, or eternal sustenance and bliss in paradise, and being saved from the torment of the hellfire. Also with certain actions, and God says, and we will grant him a divine favor, a great bounty, which is unlimited, meaning God will give you whatever he wishes, and God's giving is great. And then we mention another verse, also in the same chapter, however, in verse number 97, Surah Al-An'am, chapter number 6, verse 97. He it is who has made for you the stars, that you may follow the right direction in the darkness of the land and the sea. So God now takes our attention in order to point us towards that which exists within the cosmos, and that is the stars. Why? He it is who has made for you the stars. First of all, the verse begins by acknowledging that it is God who made the stars. In the previous one, it is God who causes the grain of corn. This comes back to a central principle within the religion of Islam, which is the principle of Tawheed, of the oneness of God, and that He is the originator and creator of the heavens and the earth. So God immediately is establishing and acknowledging that He is the creator of the heavens and the earth and the stars. And if there's anyone that disagrees, then you've got God to argue with. So if you can put up a good enough argument, then good luck. He it is who has made for you the stars, that you may follow the right direction in the darkness of the land and the sea. So, in traditional places where they do not have access to the various means of technology and the GPS and the Navman and the TomTom in order to guide themselves through the streets of darkness, they resort to the stars. And in this particular method, they will seek a means of guidance, that you may follow the right direction in the darkness of the land and the sea. So whether you're on land or whether you're on the sea, the stars will be a means of you seeking direction and orientation as to know which way you are headed and where you're coming from and where to go. We have explained, he continues, we have explained, meaning God, we have explained the signs of our existence, power and wisdom in detail for a people who know. So a people who don't know, then they're not going to understand the explanation. And this knowledge is not a knowledge of physical sciences, but it is a knowledge of the existence of an originator of the heavens and the earth. Again, a focal point within the Quran. So let us delve deeper into the spiritual fountains of this particular verse in the Quran. Allah, or God, made the stars of knowledge a means of guidance to follow amidst the difficulties of the legal actions and the spiritual wayfaring. A person wants to worship their Lord. How do they do it? There are various conditions and legal rulings which they must learn. And this will not be possible except through the knowledge. And so it is the stars of knowledge that will be a means of guidance for this person reaching God through their devotional practices. Furthermore, there's spiritual wayfaring. For when the physical body is involved in devotion to the divine through the various movements or utterances on the tongue, or the refraining from taking in certain substances if a person is fasting and this becomes a means of spiritual devotion, then these are actions of the body. Also, the spirit itself, or the heart, has a means by which it wayfares and it travels to the divine. And so this knowledge, the stars of knowledge, will serve as the means for a person to reach God. And he says in the verse that we may follow the right direction in the darkness of the land and the sea. And so the ocean of the sacred Islamic law is the knowledge by which its people will traverse to God's paradise and pleasure. For the one who seeks God seeks only one thing and one thing alone, and that is God's pleasure. He doesn't seek paradise for paradise, nor does he flee from hellfire for hellfire, but rather he seeks God for God. How is this so, when God has described to us the greatness and beauty of the meadows and gardens of paradise? Yes, you seek the paradise, O servant of God, because it is in paradise where God has placed his pleasure. And it is in the hellfire where God has placed his displeasure and anger. And so you, in fact, seek God's pleasure through the paradise. However, that's a secondary purpose. Your primary purpose is to seek the pleasure of God. But how do you seek it, and how do you arrive at paradise? The ocean of the sacred law is the knowledge by which its people will traverse to God's paradise and pleasure. And furthermore, the ocean of the reality is the knowledge by which its people will traverse, seeking it, meaning the reality. And the reality in Arabic is called al-haqiqah, or the ultimate truth known as al-haq. And this is also one of the supreme names of God, being the truth and the ultimate truth. And the understanding of the divine attributes and essence, this is witnessed through the state of divine beauty and majesty. And so when one witnesses the beauty of the divine and the majesty of the divine, what's termed in Arabic sifat al-jamal wal-jalal, God has two categories of attributes, if you like. The first are those attributes of beauty, those attributes such as compassion and mercy and love and kindness. These attributes which a person sees beauty in these attributes. And then God has another set of attributes which are attributes of majesty. These are the attributes of superiority, the attributes of justice, the attributes of avenging, the attributes of compelling. These are attributes which will make manifest God's divine will and power on this earth and in all realms. For if we were in another world we would also witness these attributes. But both you see God's manifestation of His attributes of mercy and beauty, and also His attributes which are manifested via His majesty. And so these are a selection of some of the verses of the Quran, only 2 verses which we have mentioned. 2 verses out of over 6,000 verses within the Quran. So we've given you 1 part out of 3,000 parts. And all that we have explained is 1 spiritual meaning of 2 simple verses of the Quran, which is extremely generous in the meanings which it gives to the one who ponders upon it. And so I have